This is Ted Seifert from the CME floor, reporting here on Thursday. We're going to talk about the grains markets. And, overall, you've seen a bit of a firmer tone in grains since we had that January WASDE report, just about a month ago now at this point. And if you go back and look at that report and what it said, while it was slightly bearish, it was less bearish than expectations. And you had a very large fund short position in all of the grains, looking for another leg lower off of that report. We haven't gotten that. So over the course of the past few weeks, what you've seen is some mild short covering coming from these funds that have been very short, and a little bit of support to the market. Now, that has been somewhat countered by producers selling. Guys have been looking for a bit of a rally to sell. When you get a 20-cent rally in the corn market, you're going to start to see that a little bit more. Now, going forward, the question is, where do we go from here? And you look at the fundamentals that we have in front of us compared to the fundamentals that we have behind us, and you do wonder if maybe some of the worst fundamentals for the grain markets are now in the rearview mirror, which could leave the door open for a little bit of continued firming, continued strength in the grains markets going forward. I don't know if we're going to switch right away to a big bullish narrative in grain fundamentals. It doesn't seem to be the case. We do have very large stocks of corn, wheat, and soybeans. It's going to take some time to chew through those. However, when you start looking at this upcoming growing season and you start looking at what the potential acreage mix might be, you start to wonder if we're going to have enough corn acres, and you also wonder if you're going to see a reduction in acreage as a whole, mainly because producers, farmers are working at or below break even on their profit margins, and it's putting a lot of pressure on them to grow a great crop. And on the acres that might be a little bit marginal, they might be looking for other alternatives. So you could see acreage as a whole decline, but in particular, you really get the feeling that we should be seeing corn acres over 90 million. It might be a struggle to get that unless we get some help from the board and we see higher prices encouraging producers to more aggressively plant. We're getting into that conversation right now. So over the course of the next month and a half or so, that'll be a very hot topic button for the grains. And again, looking at just the overall makeup of the grain market, you wonder if you do see a bit of a rising tide here, partially for sake of trying to buy acreage, but also partially for short covering from the large speculative fund position. Looking further out than that, you do start to wonder a little bit about weather for this upcoming growing season. We've had temperatures here in Chicago in the 40s and 50s at the tail end of January and February. We've had some pretty heavy soaking rains, which is not what we expect to see. We usually expect to see big snowstorms. So this has been a very interesting early fall or late fall into early winter. And the weather that we're having right now, you can kind of draw some comparisons to things that we've seen in the past. You can also pay attention to the forecasts going forward that are looking for a capitulating El Nino turning into a very, very strong, 100-year strong El Nino, turning into what could be an equal and opposite reaction in La Nina, which could be trouble for our growing season. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of going out and looking at those longer-term forecasts, even if they're talking about El Nino going to La Nina. I think that's something that we always want to take with a grain of salt, because just like predicting the markets, predicting the weather is trying to predict the future. None of us can do that with 100% accuracy. So it's an interesting thing to look at. We'll see how that pans out. But I think more particularly, what I find interesting is some of the comparisons that we can make in the weather that we've had thus far compared to some years past. And if you look at the time frame between November 1st through December 31st, we had record precip in a lot of areas in that time frame. The initial thought on that is that's good for subsoil moisture and potentially good for the upcoming growing season. However, if you look at some of the worst years that we've had as far as yield is concerned for corn and soybeans, it has been in years where we've gotten near or set that record in precip in that November 1st through December 31st time frame. So from a precip idea, it's sort of counterintuitive to think that a lot of rain there at that time frame could be bad for the grain markets going forward. But historically, we've seen correlations where that could be a precursor to some of the poorer growing seasons that we've seen in the past. 2012 is a notable one. 88 is a notable one. Aside from that, you look at temperatures as well, and you look at these very warm temperatures that we have here at this point, and you wonder, if that were to spill into next year's growing season and we were to have above normal temperatures on a consistent basis, like we have had here for this winter, that might spell trouble for these crops coming up. When you look at corn in particular, corn really needs a cool down at the nighttime temperatures in order to really flourish as a crop. If these above normal temperatures continue into our growing season, you might have a situation where we're not getting that cool down, and that might have a negative effect on yields. So as a whole, you've got sort of reasons in the near term to think that grain prices could have a slow and steady recovery, or a little bit of a rising tide across the board here, with some fits and starts involved with that, because there are a lot of producers that are looking for rallies to sell. When you look at longer term, you have to be a little bit concerned about the weather setup that we have going into this next growing season. Now, it is very early to be talking about that. It might not be something that is actionable as far as trades are concerned, but you do wonder if those end users, both global and domestic, are now getting a little bit more concerned about what the prospects might be for next year, and they might start stepping up and adding coverage. So if that were to start happening, on top of some fun short covering, you could have a little bit of a powder keg here in grains further on down the line. So for now, again, this has been Ted Seifert from the CME floor. Again, Zaner Ag Hedge is the firm I work for. Please reach out to us if there's anything we can do for you. But in the short term, looking for a bit of a rising tide in grains. Longer term, keep an eye out for that weather. Have a good one.